So, at the time of recording this video, the band Architects have just released their album For Those Who Wish to Exist. And within this there's the question, are the band Architects breaking the law or breaching the rules by calling themselves architects? Well, the short answer is no, they're not. The ARB and indeed the Architects Act 1997 is quite specific on when and when someone can't call themselves an architect and what breaking the rules around that would be. And funnily enough, when I was doing my part 3, members from the ARB came in and talked to us about misuse of title, and one thing they brought up was the band Architects. Apparently people do complain regularly to them about the band, and as a metalhead myself, I'm quite glad that it's not against the rules. But why is it not against the rules, and why is this okay and other examples aren't? Well, to be specific, they're a British band to start with, so you'd think that this would definitely raise a few questions, being subject to British law and everything. But the answer is they're not representing themselves as architects. They're not at all. Their band is called Architects. They're not going around calling themselves individually by the term architect, and they're not doing anything that would be construed as the work of an architect whilst using the title architect. Not unless anyone thinks that architects are in metal bands. I mean, some are, but that's not their job. So unless they went around to start doing the work of an architect, then that's when they'd probably start to get in trouble. Unless, of course, they did their part 3s. But to put it in more perspective, there's a few other things where the term architect is used where it's not actually infringing upon the ARB's criteria for misuse of title, because like I say, they're there to essentially police the title. They're there to prevent misuse of title from happening. And another interesting fact is software architect. Again, that's not something that falls under the remit of what is and isn't allowed, this falls under the remit of what is allowed, because again, it's so far removed from the actual work and function of an architect. And again, they're not representing themselves as an architect in the professional sense of an architect. They're representing themselves as software architects, which is something else entirely. If they would start going, oh, I'm an architect, I design buildings, when they're not done a part 3 and really they're a software architect, that's when they're in trouble. And it's to be mindful of what actually constitutes this. And one example of something that isn't allowed, which again, it could be seen as a different title, but it's definitely not, is interior architect. And you might be asking yourself, well, why is this one different? Well, essentially, there's this problem at the moment with interior designers calling themselves interior architects. And again, you shouldn't be calling yourself architect unless you've got a part 3. And because they're in the same field as us, and there's an overlap with what an interior designer does and what an architect does, there's that possibility that they're going to get misconstrued. And in fact, like I say, the work's pretty much the same in some elements of what the interior designer does and what the architect does, because the architect's role is so broad. And that's something that gets reported to the ARB quite often, and it's one of those things that gets flagged up as, report this if you see it, and something that gets reinforced to interior designers that, you shouldn't be calling yourself this because you want an architect. So that's something that tends to get flagged up a lot. And again, it's also designers who aren't qualified as part 3 who then start calling themselves an architect. They're the big ones who get flagged by the ARB because they're just outright misrepresenting themselves. Also, another thing that started to pop up a bit recently, which I know has been upsetting a few people, is Part 1 graduates are calling themselves graduate architects, which they shouldn't be doing at all, because you are not a graduate architect until you have graduated as an architect, which doesn't happen until after your part 3. So you are misrepresenting yourself if that's what you're doing, or if that's something you're considering doing. And there's been a bit of influx of this, and you want to avoid it because two things. It's going to upset people who are looking at your CV who are architects and going, well, they're not. And 2, you might get the ARB on your back, and as you're just starting out in the field, that's not something you want. So hopefully, this video has been a bit of fun, and hopefully it's been a bit informative as well. So if you've got any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them down below. Don't forget to like the video, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And until next time, I'll see you later.